There's a lot of talk in the media about housing affordability and how a whole generation of Australians are no longer going to be able to realise that great Australian dream of owning their own home. Now, I'm sure you've heard how investors, negative gearing, foreign investment, a whole host of factors are to blame. To make housing more affordable, for many, the only answer they've got is make house prices fall, make them cheaper. But do we really want house prices to drop? Do we want them to be more affordable in that way? Now, that's an interesting question I'm going to put to Dr. Andrew Wilson, Australia's leading housing economist and chief economist of myhousingmarket.com.au. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, and welcome to you.
Now, interestingly, we're going to offend somebody today because they're going to say, oh, they're two old fuddy-duddies, they're baby boomers and they've set themselves up. They don't understand the plight of me as a young person. So firstly, let me say, in my blended family, I've got 6 children and 10 grandchildren. Some are in their own homes, others are still to be in the market. So I understand the plight of young people. And we were there too, Andrew, in the early days. Properties were never easily affordable when we were young either, were they?
Well, that's the whole point. We have very strong aspiration for home ownership in this country, Michael. That's why we have taxation policies and incentives, because of the positives that come out of that aspiration, which is economic energy and, financial security. Now, if something is easy to achieve, it's not aspired to. And I think that's the whole point, that owning your own home has always been a difficult exercise in Australia. It's a lot easier now, believe me, than when it was my first home, because then you could only get a loan from a state bank, either the local state bank or the Commonwealth Bank. They were the only banks that did home loans. And to qualify for that, you had to save over a number of years in a specific low interest account. You could only get a 60% loan then. You had to save 40% of the value of the property. So it was a much harder journey in terms of the lending environment then than it is today. And of course, my first interest rate was a pegged 14%. I, at some stage through my 20s, thought I'd never own my own home. It was mission impossible, but eventually I did. I can't describe the pleasure and the feeling of like I've made it when I did become a homeowner.
Interestingly, in those days, Andrew, they didn't accept 2 incomes either. So if your wife worked, they often didn't accept that as an income. But I think one of the things that has changed is the aspiration of the younger generation. So again, I'm going to offend somebody, but when you and I started off, we were happy with a small apartment. You didn't expect a house, you didn't expect a media room, you didn't expect all the modern cons because it was hard. So Andrew, is housing really unaffordable?
Well, how do we measure affordability, Michael? It's affordable for some and it's unaffordable for others. We've come through a typical house price cycle where we have seen, through lower interest rates, higher house prices. Higher house prices has meant more investors, as it always does, which again continues to put upward pressure on prices. Now, the more investors we get, the fewer first home buyers we get, which is just a typical part of the price growth cycle. And it's because investors can outbid first home buyers who are restricted by their incomes in terms of how they can save that deposit to catch up with higher prices. Now, these things always reverse in terms of the cycle. Once prices growth starts to ease, investors get less interested. We typically see a period of lower prices, and of course that's a positive for first home buyers who then return to the marketplace. Now, we've had first home buyers surging into the marketplace over the last 2 years, courtesy particularly of state government incentives, and the levels are quite encouraging.
So what is affordability? How does one measure affordability, Andrew?
Well, there are various measures of affordability, Michael, and unfortunately the more depth we get to this argument, the less rational measures of affordability are produced. I know there's some models out there, they just look at the median house price in a capital city and then they assume that what an 80% loan would be and what the repayments given current interest rates are on that. And then they compare that from period to period. Of course, that's illogical because typically nobody borrows 80% of the median house price in each capital city. Now, that would mean that the average loan would be in Sydney around $800,000. Now, We know what the average loan in New South Wales is from an owner-occupier, and we know that that's in the 400s, not in the 800s. So we need to use more rational measures to understand what real affordability is. We can use that ABS data to determine what the average home loan is, and from that, of course, with current interest rates, we can look at what the repayment is, and then we can use ABS data to determine what average incomes are at the moment, and then we can look at the proportion of that repayment against that income and create an index. And what we do with that model that we've got here, using that robust data and, of course, rational data, is to see that actually affordability has improved on that measure from those that are taking out a new home loan and who are owner occupiers. And we've actually seen affordability improve in terms of the March quarter compared to the December quarter. And the other measure we can do is we can index that result by comparing it with the average level over the past 12 years. And we can see that all capital city markets are actually below that 100 mark, which is the average point for affordability over the last 12 years. So it shows us that affordability is positive in terms of the historical performance, and also that it's actually improving affordability. And of course, we shouldn't be surprised at this, because the other correlation to this is those measures of mortgage defaults, which still remain very, very low. If those that were having problems in affording their home loan, that the measure of that would be higher numbers of defaults and arrears in their home lending. And we still have very low numbers historically, proportion of defaults and loan arrears.
Well, interestingly, a very simplistic way of looking at how that's working is there are more first home buyers in the market now than there have
Yes.
been for a long, long time. So
Yes.
it must be affordable for them. But you're right. One measure of affordability of the working on the median house price for a capital city, that's not the sort of property that first home buyers buy.
That's right.
But how do they get into the market? There's a number of ways. So people are saying, oh, get out the investors, stop giving them negative gearing. Now that argument's going to disappear for a year or two. But one way the government's doing it, because they've been encouraging us, is there have been incentives to get first home buyers in the market. And that seems to be working at the moment. The other, Andrew, is using the bank of mum and dad. A lot of people are going to their parents and getting them to guarantee the home loans. That's making it a bit easier for them.
Well, it is, Michael, but you've still got to have an income to support the loan. And, obviously we had the new government, and the Labor Party had announced a policy during the recent election campaign whereby first home buyers could borrow up to 95% of the value of the property they wanted to purchase. But of course, they had to take out mortgage insurance, but there was a provision there that mortgage insurance premium would be covered for them. Now, this was restricted in terms of the numbers and the income requirements for those that would be eligible. That was a bit like, the federal government becoming the bank of mum and dad for a short time. All it does is bring forward demand. And that's what we're seeing now, Michael. We had a surge in demand, which released pent-up demand from first home buyers, particularly when New South Wales and Victoria changed their stamp duty requirements for first home buyers. But we are seeing numbers now start to ease, because that pent-up demand has been satisfied.
Clearly, there's no simple answer to affordability, but as you've said, it's a long-term problem. Smarter minds than you and I have been debating this all around the world and not come up with a solution. But I think we should remind people who are watching this, it's really a first world problem related to living in the best country in the world at the best time
Yes.
in history. If you're keen to get into particularly Sydney and Melbourne property markets, which are now global cities, it's unrealistic to expect to buy a home near town. If you lived in Paris, New York, London, you wouldn't expect to live in a house. You'd be happy to actually even be able to afford an apartment. You probably couldn't there. So maybe it's involving altering expectations of first home buyers. Some may choose to rent in those big capital cities where they want to live close to the amenities they want, and invest in a location where they can afford to buy but don't particularly want to live. And for others, sorry guys, I'm going to annoy you. It's a job of delaying gratification. Spend less than you earn, save up a deposit, take time. And if you can count on the bank of mum and dad or the government or first homeowner grants, take advantage of that, because once you get on the property ladder, it's actually going to secure one way of securing your financial future as you move forward.
I think the bank of mum and dad has been around for forever. I think that's a new concept. And I think you're absolutely right. There's no secret to owning your own home. You work hard, you save, you make sacrifices, and you're not too fussy in terms of where you live. You get onto that property ladder as soon as you can, and the rest is just the same experience as your parents and your grandparents had.
Well, who wouldn't like to buy the house their parents paid for the price their parents paid many years ago? But ask your parents, they thought it was very unaffordable then too.
Yes.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. Look forward to catching up with you next week.
Thank you, Mike.